Welcome back, and just in case you joined us, this is KBC News Check, and on this hour we are talking about matters education, and to be more specific, we are looking at the Form 1 placement or admission, if you like. Yesterday, Professor George Magoha, the Education CS, talked about 1.2 all the candidates who sat for the KCP examination, and the results were announced 2 weeks ago, are all going to be placed in secondary school. Well, that's some good news, but he later said that he's receiving so many calls. Oh, my kid has not gone to the school that I wanted, or that the school that my kid deserves. And it's more or less something that recurs each and every year. And to help me discuss that further in length, I am joined by two education experts. And first and foremost, let me introduce Irene Kamau. She is the CEO of Kasarani Group of Schools. And on my extreme left, we have Dr. Mark Matunga. He is not a new face here. He has really helped us when you talk about matters education. He is also the president and CEO of Africa Center for Advanced Technology, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you're also a scientist.
Yes.
Thank you so much for making time.
Yes.
Perhaps we'll start with you, Madam Irene. What do you make of the placement? Remember, the good CS talked about all the 1.2 million, apart from the inmates and those of our age, have been placed in a secondary school. But as soon as he did that, a lot of people complained. A child from Turkana is taken to a school in Mombasa. A child in Mombasa is placed in a school in Garissa. And it's always the same thing each and every year.
Yeah, thank you first and foremost for having me. I appreciate the efforts of the government in placing the learners. We are happy that the children have all been placed. The 100% transition policy seems to be working very well about the placement. But then you see the reason why the CS would be getting these calls is because there are some schools, and he mentioned it, that are high preferential schools, highly preferred by parents. And
okay, allow me to just interject.
Yes.
To give that picture, because we have that story, and even the schools that a lot of candidates did prefer. Let's first of all hear what the good CS had to say regarding the 2022 Form 1 students who will be joining secondary schools next month.
Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha says the Form 1 selection process was based on merit, choice and equity. The remarks appearing to provide comfort to students who failed to receive call-ups to schools of their choice.
In the placement, the majority of candidates who scored 400 marks and above were placed in national or extra-county schools of their choice. Special needs candidates were also placed in regular schools of their preference, while others were placed in special schools or based on their disability categories, merit and choice.
Nanyuki High School appeared to be the most desired center of excellence, with 156,003 students applying for Form 1 slots, despite the school having the capacity to admit a paltry 480 students. 149,087 students had picked Kabianga High School, though the school can only accommodate 528 learners in Form 1. Pangani Girls capped the top 3 positions of the most desired schools, attracting 118 and 73 applications against the 336 slots available.
We have still refused to be reasonable. Just like everybody wants to go to Kenya High School, Alliance and Pangani, in advising their children, they still also advise the children to make exactly the same mistake. And that is going to be a matter that the education field officers, together with the teachers, must take action upon, together with the parents.
But in the end, the government believes it has done everything to ensure all learners transit to secondary school. The Ministry of Education has placed 38,797 candidates in national schools, another 2,045 in special needs education, 214,960 others in extra-county schools, 218,456 more in county schools, and 726,311 others will join sub-county schools, while another 9,128 are refugees in camps. Professor Magoha announced that the government will be offering 9,000 scholarships to needy students.
Like I've said, bursaries and scholarships should be given only for those children in boarding schools. In very simple English, the government of the Republic of Kenya pays for school fees for every child in a day secondary school. So if you are going to give so much money to a child in a day secondary school, some of that money may end up in your own pocket. So we are going to advise that you give scholarship to only children who are going to boarding schools.
Over 1.2 million candidates who sat for their 2021 KCPE examinations will have a chance to continue with their secondary school education in national, extra-county, county and sub-county schools, even as the government continues to assure.
Yes, and that is exactly what transpired yesterday at the KICD when Professor George Magoha did announce how the placement for the students will be. And Irene, you had already started talking about, we've seen the other schools, Kapsabet, the Pangani Girls, the Kabianga, being preferred or being the choice of many students. Yes.
Yes, that preferential situation with the parents. For example, even Nanyuki High School with a preferred of 164,000 people, but only having a capacity of 400. If you look at the capacity for Pangani Girls, the same story. This means, therefore, that you are likely to get a lot of learners and their parents who didn't get their preferred school. But that's not because they didn't qualify for it, but because they can only take so many. And where now for us as the private schools, we offer an option where the child can be able to be placed in private schools that are equally good and meet the standards. Out of the number of schools that I've seen on the list that were awarded new learners, I didn't see the private school category. It was highly missing. I don't know what that means, but we do have some good private schools where the parents can be able to place the children. The issue of affordability to those private schools, in my own thinking, is that most of the parents that have been able to put their children through private primary schools can equally afford to put their children in a private public secondary school. But for one reason or the other, we didn't see children receive letters, and even if they did from the private sector, they also received another one from a public school. For example, a child would receive a letter from Kabarak High School and also receive another one from now a government school. So we had that kind of a conflict at the private sector as Kenya Private Schools Association. That is something that we are still thinking about and wondering how to mitigate, because with a 100% transition, the learners are all of them transitioning into the government public schools. I don't know where that leaves our private schools, but
it's a good thing you brought the private schools, but I have a question a little bit later on how the government can work with the private sector.
Yes, please.
To try and mitigate what parents say it's a deal that they didn't sign up for, and they expect their kids in certain schools, so the private sector can chip in, working closely with the government, and you will tell us how you would want that done, because you're actually in a private school. But let me bring in a Doc here. Doc, what do you make of the Form 1 selection? Bearing in mind that we had to have 100% transition, and he talked about there are a number of issues to look at, equity, the performance of the student as well.
Troy, I I don't know if you want me to tell you the truth or
yes,
just
please.
to just go along with
the truth,
with the story of 100% transition. First of all, let me thank Professor Magoa for what is viewed as 100% transition in terms of placement. That is not a difficult thing to do, to be honest. I don't think that I should come here to actually say that, hey, you know what, it is great in Kenya, we have achieved 100% transition, but that's just placement. You have this number of students. I can write for you a computer program that would place those students in less than 5 minutes in all the schools. Okay. That is an easy thing to do. The most difficult thing is, one, are they going to actually attend those schools? I mean, a good number of them are going to go to private schools. Another good number are going to actually go to polytechnics or village polytechnics. And some of them, yes, will go to some of these other schools. But I think the issue that we really want to address, I know Prof has spoken about equity, choice, and what else? He said the third thing.
Performance of the student.
Performance. That is where the problem is. Because really, while I laud the Ministry of Education for having achieved 100% transition, there's still a bigger problem. And I think this is what we should come in with the new reforms in education. I'm talking as somebody from a marginalized community, from Suba. I come from Fangano Island, where the environment of learning is completely different from a student who is learning in Nairobi. And then when you come and say that, okay, fine, I performed poorly, but again because of the environment, and so I miss the points to actually go to a national school. The point that I want to make here with the reforms in education is to improve the standards in all the schools. And this classification of national schools, county schools, whatever sub-county schools, ward schools, is also a big problem because it brings the stigma of if you're not in a national school, then you're in a county school or a sub-county school. It sort of like condemns you to that environment. If you look at my grades in high school, they're not the greatest grades. If you look at the schools that I went to Mauta Primary School on Fangano Island, then I went to Kodero Bara Secondary School. But that didn't stop me from going all the way to the US to study and being one of the leading IT brains in this country. But if I was just left, in fact, I didn't even attain A minus or B or whatever. But I believe that I have the potential. And if you look at some of the things that I've done in this country, including initiating digital content development in this country and a host of other things that I've done in this country in the IT sector, if I was just left that you've attended these marks, you've gone to a sub-county school or you've gone to a county school, it then condemns you. If you're a C student, it condemns you. What Magoa needs to do in standardizing education, and I think he's been on a good track, he needs to actually, we need to move away from this grading and these classifications, because that is what is now going to encourage a host of other students to actually attain. I mean, there are people, if you look at Professor Magoa's office, there's a gentleman there called Professor Ogur, who was not necessarily an A student, but the guy rose through the ranks through TVET until now he's actually a professor. I mean, look at the likes of Professor Karega Mutai, who basically was a P1 school teacher and rose all the way to become a professor. So what needs to happen really is normalization of situations, conditions, and environment in all of these schools. One last point that I want to make on this, and I know I'm throwing you off a little bit, but when you talk of private schools and public schools, there's a huge difference. I mean, in this country, we don't even recognize that. If our private schools can be the way they are and preferred for a lot of parents, why can't the public schools actually rise to that level? Before, those schools used to be very good schools. I mean, some of us just went to those public schools. So if the government can actually put investment in improving and normalizing and standardizing the education environment. It'll be a lot easier. We'll not be celebrating 100% transition. And I want to make my last point on with regard to what Joe said earlier. When we are talking of a student on Fongano Island and a student at Nairobi School. What basically standardizes that is partly in the century we live in today is technology. Because on your smartphone, you receive the same content here in Nairobi as the same child or the same person in Beta or in Samburu. Technology will help actually standardize some of this so that we are not segregating and we are not discouraging students who would otherwise do well. That means that I would not be rushing to go to Alliance High School because I get the same content, I get the same quality education on a platform that is same everywhere. I mean, Joe was talking of 1.2 million devices that were sent to schools. Most of those devices are actually just sitting in those
devices
schools.
Because of course, infrastructure, power.
Yes, I mean, so government needs to be a little bit more serious. I don't think that I want to sit on this set and celebrate 100% transition.
Yes, and Irene, it's a good thing that, Doc, you've touched a lot of things that we will be able to look at a little bit keenly. And Doc, you've said a good thing that sometimes a kid will feel so unwanted, so you done well. You wanted to go to a certain school. You have already achieved the marks that you should, and you're taken to Samburu, to Turkana, to anywhere. Even you demoralize the student or even the parent.
Yes.
That can affect a child's performance, which we haven't had even the good CS talking about, or any stakeholder talk about what happens or how a kid is affected when he or she is not taken to the school of choice, and he or she knows well she did perform well, and taken to a school that even the parents themselves didn't even imagine their kid would be taken to.
Tragically so. My thinking is that as a consumer of the policies of the government at the local level, at the grassroots level, we are more in touch with these children on a daily basis. And so when I speak, I think I speak for the number of school head teachers and directors who deal with learners on a one-to-one basis. When policy is made at the high levels, rarely do they look at the actual impact on the ground. You see, by placing a child to the person sitting with the statistics, it's a plus. And a very big one, because they have been able to place, like the good doctor said here, placing all these people is a big plus. What they haven't said is the effect of that, even psychologically, to the child. For example, at our school, we had children that were called into schools that they never even knew existed. And so the head teacher, I kid you not, the head teacher had a hard time yesterday explaining to the parents, that's a very good school, that's a very good school. So you see, there's also a level of ignorance at the grassroots level with the parents on the placement. Similarly, I look at it in this manner. As we are placing the children into these schools, are we looking at how it will affect them even socially? I know about the formative action where we endeavor as a country to have the face of the country in a school, where you get one child from Northeastern in a particular county, another one from the top child in that school gets to enter into a certain school, so that you're able to look like we are balancing. But then the child has to be uprooted out of a certain geographical region and to travel to that place so that they can be able to get an education. So what happens if the parents cannot be able to make the child go there for one reason or the other? They will opt out. When they opt out, that's when you have the second selection. Okay, which happens naturally, because not everybody called to Alliance will show up, because someone was called to Alliance and they are somewhere in Northeastern. By the time that mama is thinking my child is going to Alliance somewhere in Kikuyu, they are not sure even how to get there. So the position becomes vacant and they have to fill it. Now, psychologically, several things happens to the child. It baffles me how we make policies completely unaware of the impact it would have on the consumer of the policy that we are making. For example, the 100 transition that that is celebrated, which I started by saying it is good, it was achieved, has on the other hand seen very few learners going into private sector. So we are killing the private secondary schools. So good private secondary schools would find themselves grappling and struggling to fill capacity. We have over 120,000 Form 1 places in the private sector in good schools, the Strathmores, the Riara, Thika Road Christian schools. There are many. St. Catherine's in Machakos, there are many. But none of those children got an invitation letter to those schools. So what's going to happen is that though we are supposed to be helping or partnering with the government in the provision of education in this nation, you find that the private schools will end up shutting down, one way or the other, eventually. I'm looking at policy that has been made in another country that has somehow closed down the private sector. And I'm looking at Rwanda very, very closely. When the 100% transition came, I traveled to Rwanda just to see how policy can actually close down an entire industry. And you find that the private schools are no more. There is not a private school in Rwanda, maybe one or two, but it has been dealt very heavily by policy. What does that mean? Does it mean that the private schools are not able to up their game, or is it that I don't quite get it? But we on the grassroots, both the parent, the child, and the school are wondering exactly how is this going to work for us. Yes, we know the government has the positions to take in the children. There's also something else which we call the heart of the person, the heart of the republic. The future of the republic is in the souls, the children that we are placing. They could be, you can call them numbers when someone is sitting down to analyze, but they are future of the republic. When we transition all the children to secondary schools with capitation, including the one with whatever marks, all of them, then I don't know where we are placing the tertiary institutions. Like, I don't know what we are saying to our learners. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. What exactly are we teaching our pupils, our learners, our children? When they are doing this examination, mark you brought for us an examination and guns to guard that examination. But then even if they get 100 and 80 and 40, they transition. I'm finding mixed signals here. So what's the purpose of guarding that examination that heavily? If all of us will go to high school, you'd better just let the teachers mark. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's a good point that Mark, you brought about that. Yes, indeed, it's 100% transition, but we cannot celebrate and say, yes, this is the 100% transition that we want. The private sector has been kept aside for now, as Irene has talked about, and the government has a lot of challenges. We just can't accept 100%. It can be 100% that is quite 100%, and is 100% just 100%. You just transit to the next level. And there are other technological and infrastructural challenges that the country is and the education sector is facing, but they have not been addressed. Case in point, you've talked about technology. A child in Fangano will have the same technology as a child here in Nairobi. They'll get the same information, but they have different working or even learning environment.
Let me correct our English here a little bit. It is not 100% transition. It is 100% placement. It is taking names randomly, whichever formula they use, and placing them in those institutions. That doesn't mean that this young man or young girl from Fangano Island, Mauta village, will go to Samburu. That is why I'm cautious in an attempt to actually celebrate this, what we call 100% transition. If anybody at the ministry use the language of 100% transition, that's misleading. It is 100% placement. of all the students, looking at the spaces that are available and placing them there. But Troy, I'm notorious about setting my own questions and answering them. There's a bigger problem that we're going to face in the next few weeks. A much bigger problem. And that is the problem of transition to grade 6, which is junior secondary.
Yes.
And the reason I'm saying that right now at this point, because we've been talking of transition, all the issues that we have been basically articulated by Madame here. But here, when you're talking of a class 6 child being taken to a building or a classroom that has been built in a secondary school that's about 10 kilometers away, how are you going to deal with that? Because you're not taking them there to actually even board. I am telling you this as somebody who is sitting in a perfect situation in what is going to be a perfect storm. That ties back to issues of policy. When you come up with policy of transition or policy of placement, then what are you actually doing? Because, thought has to go into some of this. The practicality of all of these things actually have to come to play. I am a parent who once fought hard for my child to go to Alliance Girls High School, only for her to actually drop out at Form 3. She did not proceed. What did I do? I had to actually bring her out and basically put her on a technology platform. She's now second year at USIU. Okay. But that is me, somebody who is capable, who is able.
Yes.
What will happen to a parent who is not capable and is not even able to actually provide transport? I know, yes, we're providing school fees.
Yes.
But what about transport to the school? And what about school supplies that this child needs to... So before we get to celebrating 100% placement, we just need to actually look at the dynamics of what we have just done. I know the president says all the students must move to the next level, which brings me to actually emphasize on a misnomer. Why do we place, or why do we station 250,000 policemen with guns to guard an exam? The country stops, everything stops for that period of time. And we spend a lot of money. And these exams are actually set and printed in the UK. Yet, by the way, we print our money in Kenya, but we print our exams in
the ballot.
So what's more valuable? And then we come and say 100% transition or placement. And this is what's happening in the developed world as well. They have standardized, not actually even standardized, but district level or class assessments that basically allows you to actually go to the next level. And I am not saying, we are trying to also come up with what we call national integration and all of that kind of stuff. Yet we failed to take Nywele teachers to, I don't know whether that's hate speech, Nywele teachers to Northeastern.
Yes.
We failed to actually take them there. And we want to take children there. We want to take Nywele children there. And I'm not being a...
It's a good thing because
so let's deal with issues. Let's be
especially
practical.
in Northeastern Province.
Yes.
If at all, the former Northeastern Province,
yes.
the teachers, they said, we are not going back.
We're not going,
But at the end of the day, the government places the students
exactly
in that, and that brings in the private sector. Let's look at how the private sector can chip in, because we've had cases where deserving students fail to take up positions that they should in national schools, for example, or the county schools as they are called now. But looking at the private sector, a lot of students, thousands, are going to be joining private schools, and they will leave the opportunities that they were supposed to join public schools. Are we sure that we're going to get the equity and the fairness the government talks about in placing the deserving students in those schools? And what can the private sector do to ensure that they also bridge the gap? Because a lot of students will not go to the schools of their choice.
Okay, before I answer that, and thank you for that question, but I wanted to respond to something that the good doctor has talked about or mentioned about the grade 6 transition. I want to echo what he has said. That actually is a time bomb waiting to explode. One, if we insist on 100% transition or placement, as we have agreed to call it, then it means that all the learners in our grade 6 will have to be placed into those schools where they have no probably idea that they are supposed to go outside their region. Remember, the baby is still a kid. At class 6 is still a child. And I'm going to be placing this child in a junior secondary that is either in this primary school or in the secondary school. If it is in the primary school, that's okay because the child is still within the age mates of the others. But if it is in the secondary school, we have a serious challenge waiting to happen. Big age gap between the child coming into junior secondary and the one clearing Form 4, they are wide apart. Big disparity. Yes. What will this child be taught by the one who is in Form 4? If we don't put it into understanding, and that's why I started by saying, please, we are not numbers, we are people. Children are children. If we are handled as numbers, then we will backfire completely. Let's look at it as people. The placement of our children in those schools, and they decide not to go now to the alliance, coming to your question, and they will come into our schools. We appreciate we have the capacity, and we can be able as private schools to take in these children and educate them. In the past, the performance has been good even at the private sector level. But the worry would be, as we continue that 100% placement, so to speak, if we do that in grade 6, we do that in Form 4, we do that all along, there is a bottleneck waiting for us right at the top in the entry to the university, waiting for us, because this is a child that from the word go has gotten the notion, I don't have to work very hard, I can get through, I can sail through. But then there is a one who has been working very hard. So I don't know what it's bringing up, and I don't know exactly where we are going to. Although we have said we will get them to select different sections when they get to Form 1 to year 10, 11, and 12, they will be selecting which stream they are going into. But notice, right from the word go, teaching is not only what I talk to you about. There is also what I don't say, which sometimes can constitute more learning than what I said. Our learners are watching and hearing us making policies that are affecting their lives directly. I get to the end of Form 4, or senior secondary at that time, and I want to tell you that I'll take you to college to do X, Y, Z. You see, I have not formatted you to that way. So I don't know how we are going to make it, but I believe the government has a situation analysis, and they are able to see how they will mitigate this one, so that when we come to that, we are able to. This Form 1 selection is only mirroring what is awaiting in the class 6 selection into grade 6 to grade 7, and then grade 9 into grade going on to junior secondary, to senior secondary. That what we are doing here should be looked at as a precursor of what is going to be happening even in the other levels, because it's not only about this particular class 8. No, this year we are going to be having 3 candidate classes in our schools. We have a class 6 is a candidate class, we have a class 8 is a candidate class, and we also have a Form 4 is a candidate class. So this year the NEC officials will be coming to our schools 3 times. So we're going to be having this placement exercise for 3 categories of pupils. What are we doing with them even in this particular one when we only have 1 class? That is what I would say, that it is important to look at that policy a little bit more keenly, understanding that we teach values at tender age. We teach thought process, ability to think and ability to place yourselves. These are the people that will graduate and become our politicians. These are people that will graduate and become our doctors. Yet we have told them, actually, it's a responsibility of us to ensure that they just go. We just want you to go to the next level. We just want you to go. How you go is even my worry. I'll worry how you go. And once you go, I'll even worry how you survive. And then I'll worry how you go the next one. And then I want that doctor to put me on a table during, and I'm sick and this person is supposed to perform surgery on me. I don't know what kind of...
Doc, perhaps you can touch on that. She's brought about a very interesting point on the policies that we have, and we can't just assume that it's 100% transition around the placement now from from grade 5 to 6 to junior secondary to senior secondary, and the list just keeps going on. And as a country, we have a knack of plunging head first, and then we see what happens. And now we're talking about our kids. As you respond to that, you can also, the CS talked about using affirmative action to ensure that students in arid and semi-arid regions receive their right and their share fare of national schools and the county schools.
So, Troy, so that we are not accused of government bashing.
Yes.
And I don't want Gov't to actually call me and say, Mark Matunga, this guy, what is he doing? And of course, my friend and PS, Joan. I think they've done a good job in many areas. You know, you remember since Gov't was the chair of NEC, he brought some bit of sanity into examination management, has tried to get rid of cartels in, not all of them, but tried to get rid of cartels in the education sector. Brought some bit of order in the, but with that, he I think has also used that opportunity for good reason, good intentions, but also to actually push certain things that might not be practical. And you know what you're saying, that you know in Kenya we like to go into the deep end, so and then you're told to sink or swim, and then you have to actually figure out. But remember, as Madam said, we're dealing with human beings. And we're dealing with human beings who we're supposed to be nurturing, to actually be positive contributors to our society, in health, in education, in engineering, and all of these areas. And so it's something that actually we need to actually deal with a lot of care. I'm sitting here. As of yesterday, I've received quite a number of transcripts that I need to take to Gov't and the team from parents who want their children to be moved from this school to the other.
Yes.
Last year I declined to actually support anyone. I have not made a decision that I'm going to actually help anyone in this sort of transition. But even as we deal with that, one thing that we have to appreciate that Gov't did on the platform of equity is to help students from marginalized areas to actually to access, you know, institutions that they would otherwise not access. I appreciated the fact that there are students from the slums that were transitioned or that were placed in quote unquote better schools. That is a good gesture. That is definitely a good gesture. That's why I'm saying I don't want us to just sit here and say we are a government bashers.
Yes.
We give credit to where it's due, and basically ask for a bit more caution where they are going the wrong way. You know, Madam has talked of 3 transitions. You know, earlier on you had guests here who are talking about their own transition, and that is political transition as well. So we actually have 4 major transitions this year. You can call it 5, because we're also transitioning from Corona.
Yes.
So we're dealing with a lot of issues. So imagine what the students would also be dealing with. And remember, this period of time, April or May to December is going to be crushed for all these students, some of them in the new environment, class 6 in the new environment, Form 1s in the new environment and all of that. And you miss a small section or a small point or a small time period in a child's life, you may damage that child forever. I can tell you that for my daughter, when she said that I'm not going back to Alliance, that is third term, I had to actually sit, we sat down as a family and listened to her. Why is it that you don't want to go back to Alliance?
It was a big disappointment as a father.
I mean, who doesn't want your child to be an Alliance? I mean, I was all over on Facebook talking about my daughter at Alliance. And then here she is saying, Dad, Mom, siblings, I'm not going back to Alliance.
And it's just 1 year.
So close to finishing. And so for us, hey, just finish. But I think had we not listened to this child, had we just basically gone with our pride, hey, you are at Alliance, I'm a father with a daughter at Alliance, we put on our Facebook, we have visited our daughter at Alliance. I mean, when you're talking to your peers, hey, my daughter is at Alliance, who doesn't want that? But I'm one person who basically stepped back. Had we not listened to her, we would have lost her. Not that she would have died, but she would have even drifted into depression, because it's about listening to that child. And I think that's what Madam is saying, that, let us also listen to the practitioners, those who are with this, from a policy point of view. Before you actually come up with a policy and say 100% transition, class 6, junior secondary, we're building it in a secondary school. But then what's going to happen to the schools that don't have secondary schools nearby, that don't have the junior classroom that has been, the model classroom that has been built? Like, I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example in my home area. On Fangano Island, we have about 30 primary schools in an area of about 60 square kilometers. That's the size of the island. And then the classrooms that have been built are 7. That is class 6, the junior secondary, and they've been built in secondary schools. So then think of what is going to happen to a class 6 child who actually is in a primary school that doesn't have any secondary next to it, because we have about 7, 8 secondary schools that are actually scattered, and this child is about 10 kilometers away. What's going to happen? I mean, she's talk of the age gap, but who's going to be teaching this child in the secondary school where the classroom is? Are we going to actually extract the teacher who was teaching them in that primary school to walk with them every day 10 kilometers to that school? I know there are teething problems, but that is what calls on dialogue with the practitioners. And that is what the ministry need to do, and that is what Magoa needs to do. I know he's a straightforward guy. He's a one-dimensional guy. Once he's decided he's going to this direction, that's okay. But I think there needs to be a bit more dialogue in some of these.
And still on what Doc had mentioned, and the CS also mentioned the same thing on students from humble backgrounds. Talked about bursaries and sponsorship. And warned, actually, 2 weeks ago when he was releasing the results, he warned all those people who want to use bursary for other intended purposes or to give to people who do not deserve the bursaries. Perhaps you can touch on that. I know you come from a private schools background, but I'm quite sure also in those schools you do sponsor students, right?
Yes. Okay. I also want to start by applauding you see the placement that we're talking about, 100% transition, and we are talking about it in it comes out like it's a bashing, but there's a beautiful side to it. Last year I was still here on the set for the same things, Form 1 selection, and I remember what we were discussing that time was children who had committed suicide because of performance. This year,
The pressure. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
This year, you can see children have hope. I'll be blessed. Nobody has to die because they can't go to Form 1.
Yes.
And that to me, and that's why I said policy affects the people right there down in very dynamic ways, real actual tangible effects of policy, that there was hope. Second thing that happened, in as much as we have talked about the guarding of the exam, is that there were the cheating cases. There were attempts here and there.
Yes.
But this year, if you listened carefully, it's not something that our CS had to sit there and tell us about the number of schools that were cheating. This thing went down because even the need to cheat has equally been dealt with by the understanding that everyone has hope to go somewhere.
That's true.
But that's an effect.
Yes.
And we have to appreciate that effect as well, and then apply the checks and balances. About the bursary, from the private sector point of view, we do get the bursaries. But it's the parent that goes for those bursaries from the relevant offices. There is no situation where they would say this one is in a private school, we won't give bursaries.
Yes.
They do give the bursaries, but they are not that much that they can be able to clear the fees of the children. However, it's in the hands of the politicians as opposed to in the hands of the educators, because you could have the DEO or others. So it is really not anything that we in the private school can make a comment about in terms of bursaries. We do know they are there, but we wonder very much whether that bursary kitty, that bursary fund, really does trickle down with an impact. For example, if your fees is about 15,000 and the bursary gives you 3,000, surely you still won't go to school. Yeah, you won't go to school unless the bursary can be able to fund you fully, because remember, it is for a needy child. The reason why you've classified this child as needy is because you've run a check behind that child to find out can they afford it, and you've discovered they can't. So if you have discovered they cannot, it's only fair, therefore, that if you're going to give bursary, then authorize a full support system for that child. I would rather you support 2 fully than have 20, all of them a little bit, and therefore 20 of them have gotten the money, but 20 of them didn't finish school.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Because my director informs me that our times is up. You lead an advanced technology institution, and we are leveraging on technology to try and even. How can we try and even the scores for our students so that we may try and bridge that gap, that education gap? As we wind in 1 minute.
I'm joking.
Oh,
Sorry.
Apologies for that. Apologies for that.
May I have some water?
Oh, okay. I think we can get some water. Okay. Okay. So, how can we leverage on technology?
Yes.
To ensure that we kind of have a even playing field.
Technology does provide an even playing field. According to me, is that everybody can be able. You see, these days. Everybody can access a smartphone. They are not that inaccessible as before. And then we have a situation where everybody can be able to access Wi-Fi. That we tested during the pandemic. You see, the pandemic also had something good that was coming out of it. The ability for every homestead, a good number of children were able to come online, both from public school and private school. And
perhaps, Doc, you can help.
No, I think she's articulated.
Yes,
technology is an equalizer. We saw that during the pandemic. It can be done.
Yes.
And
of course, our good CS ICT, John Musharu, talked about that and the hotspot and everything.
SchoolNet, connectivity in all of these schools.
Yes.
Let's get money from the exams department and put
Wi-Fi. Because we don't need exams to move. Thank you so much, Doc, for that. Thank you so much. And let me appreciate Brian Waswa, Florian Odari, Bridget Mastergraph, Anthony Zachu, Lilian Kirwa, who was following from Qatar, Freddy Koyalo, and the list keeps going on. Thank you so much for watching. We've been talking about the Form 1 placement, and I had been joined by two education experts. We have Irene Kamau, who is the CEO of Kasarani Group of Schools, and on my immediate left, we had Dr. Mark Matunga, who is an education expert, an ICT guru, an ICT scientist, as well as a leader when it comes to matters technology and education. Thank you so much for creating time. We are now switching the language to Swahili, and we have Tamrini and Kurunzi Mashinani. Thank you so much for watching. Let's continue this conversation on our social media spaces.